What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. Now I've neglected Devastator long enough, and over the weekend I jumped into some Devastator gameplay, finishing the story of Worldslayer so I could get my 5 PAX points and farming quite a bit of trials as well as expeditions to just try and get some gear and slap together good old-fashioned Bleed Quake with the Seismic Commander. And that's what we're going to look at today. So this is of course a build that focuses around the Seismic Commander set and dealing more damage to enemies that are bleeding, and then essentially stacking on as many damage effects as we can on top of that to deal more damage against things that are bleeding. Now specifically how I like to run this build is, of course, you have to have Quake, but then I use Endless Mass, which is I don't think a very popular skill to a lot of people, simply due to the fact that it's horrendous to run alongside it and try to shoot enemies as they're getting pulled together. However, in solo it is one of the best ways for you to essentially gather all the enemies together, especially if you have the increased range Endless Mass, and allow you to dump all your quakes essentially on them. Now I also pair this with Leap, of course, so we can get some more juicy debuffs via that, and that's essentially how I see Seismic Commander Bleed Quake working for me right now. This is of course an AP build, which is my favorite kind of builds in Outriders, so we want to complement that with a weapon that can deal massive AoE and everything like that, and that we will also see in this build. Now overall I'm quite happy with the power level of this. This has always been a very consistent build when it came to building Devastator, and one of the ways in which you can build Devastator to be able to deal with large amounts of enemies at once, while also basically being unkillable due to the sheer amount of damage that you're dealing and essentially feeding that back into your health. Now with the addition of the PAX points that we have now with Worldslayer, this just further on increases the power level of this, and then with the addition of 5 additional mod slots that we can put in via the Apocalypse system and the third tier, we can just sort of even more round out the damage profile of this. I'm pretty happy with the way that this turned out. In one way I am a little bit sad though, because it seems to me right now, and that can obviously be wrong and I'll know more after I spend quite a bit more time with the Devastator, but it kind of seems to me right now that Devastator is the class out of the 4 with the least new awesome options with the release of Worldslayer. I definitely think there are other options available. You don't have to play Bleed Quake, but Bleed Quake is pretty damn strong and essentially is built almost exactly the same way that it was built when the game launched originally. Now when it comes to the actual build itself, we will do it in the usual way, and we'll look at the weapons, then the armor mods, we'll look at the skill tree, we'll look at the PAX choices, and I will offer up some suggestions as what to target first in the Ascension tree. We'll also of course look at the skills and discuss the rotation. Now when it comes to the weapon itself, I managed to find myself a Thunderclap that rolls with Nicola's Revenge by default, and I got Stigmatized on it. Now when we get to the mods on the armor, you'll see that I find an additional way to stack more damage against stuff that's got Toxic on it, and it's just me leaning more into additional multipliers for more damage on enemies. So I need Stigmatized on here so that I can apply Toxic to the enemies as well, and so therefore, while this build as usual with AP builds has no problem with fast killing trash, the chunky monsters and elites, captains, bosses and things like that is where you're gonna struggle slightly, so you're gonna have to find other ways of ramping up your damage, and I found this to work quite well. I do have Ultimate Damage Link on here as well, and I found the interaction between Ultimate Damage Link and Nicola's Revenge, and essentially pulling all the enemies together with an Endless Mass and then hitting them with a bunch of quakes and everything is just a fantastic way to deal a lot of damage to a lot of enemies at once, and that's basically the reason why I do this. Now I do also have my good old-fashioned Radiation Splash, Moaning Winds, Clip Combustion combo, the reload combo as it's known, for situations where I want to chunk out a bunch of additional AoE damage, and this really does also help with taking out captains and everything if they die, or sorry, if they don't die to your rotation of your skills. And when it gets to the actual build, of course this uses Seismic Commander, but I do have some other pieces on here. More specifically, I'm using the Marshal's helmet for the headpiece. Now what you want to be doing is stacking as much anomaly power as you can, of course, and for that reason what we have here is I basically have wider horizons here, which makes my Endless Mass have a bigger radius, so it pulls more enemies in. I have an extra quake on here so that I can get access to my 3 quakes that I need for the rotation, and then I have Euthanizer on here, which gives 16% more damage against enemies afflicted by Toxic. As I mentioned, I apply Toxic by shooting stuff with Stigmatized, so that's just another way. And if you then kill something that has Stigmatized on it, that explodes and spreads the Toxic around even more. Now, on the chest piece itself, another martial piece here. This has high intensity on it, which basically means that my endless mass also makes targets affected by it take 30% more anomaly damage. So this is also good because, again, most of our damage, in fact all of our damage, is coming from anomaly, and our quakes are where a lot of that damage comes from. So we want to make sure that we can maximize that. We have Captain Hunter on here to help us deal with captains, elites, bosses, and that sort of thing. And then we have the no resistance against the fortified, as well as, you know, it's a sister mod or partner mod or whatever you want to call it, unstoppable force here, because we want to be leaning into as much armor piercing and resistance piercing as we can, and then essentially cycle that for us into more anomaly power. Now, you'll notice that specifically on my weapon here, I have crit damage. So what you should then also do if you fully want to capitalize on that is you need to find yourself a weapon that actually has armor pierce on it, because that's actually just going to increase this effect that you get from that 2 mod combo. I was using this for a while, Charred Lance with Death Ray, Stigmatized, and First Things First on, which is also working quite well because, of course, First Things First just ramps up that whole armor piercing to like the next level. So definitely you can use either one of these two. For a while I was even running the Charred Lance and then the Thunderclap and not the Guillotine. And so what I would do is I would use the Thunderclap when I'm just running around messing up trash, and then I'd switch to the Charred Lance when I had to take a boss down, which also worked quite well. Now, when we get over to the pants itself, I have Tainted Blood on here. This is the first piece of the Seismic set here. Seismic's set bonus, of course, says that we deal increased damage to enemies that are affected by bleed, and this is a 50% increase, so it's massive. So we definitely want to capitalize on that. Tainted Blood just, you know, basically excels and makes that even more impressive. Then with Anomaly Echo here, we have extremely low cooldowns, so we are usually, you know, dropping quakes like at least, you know, 3 quakes every 12 to, you know, maybe 15 seconds on a rotation. And so you're generally gonna have this Anomaly Echo buff up all the time, especially if you're mixing in leaps and endless mass in the middle as well. And I mean, even melee can activate this as well. So Virulent Compound on here is just another way for us to capitalize on the toxic effect. This helps us deal more damage against bosses. Like I said, due to the way how this build works and due to how effective Quake is at killing trash, you will never have a problem with. Your biggest issue really is actually just lining them up in the right way so you can take them down with the least amount of quakes. But when it comes to bosses, you do want that additional damage. Now, looking at the hands over here, we have Unstoppable Force, as I mentioned before, and we have Ground Crush, which just increases the base damage of Earthquake. Earthquake is the main damage dealer for us, alongside Bleed, of course, and this is going to just increase those slams that you do, the base damage of those. Power Assimilation is good here because the more elites, you know, bosses, captains, whatever like that are on the field, it's just going to increase your anomaly power, and that's just going to give you more powerful earthquakes and everything else. Last but certainly not least, on the boots, we have second quake here, so that gets us up to the count of 3 quakes, which is what we want. Can this build work with 2 quakes? I guess you could do that, but what you really do want is you want access to the 3 quakes because of the fact of how it scales, especially with the PAX Points, and it's just the most optimum way for you to deal as much possible damage with this setup. Earth's Legacy on here increases the range of Earthquake by 60%. This is kind of like super mandatory because Earthquake's base range is super floppy and really terrible, and actually doesn't reach all that far. And especially if you come from like a pyromancer like me, you're used to large hits, you know, far reaching hits with your abilities. So it takes quite a bit of adaptation to adapt to the range of Earthquake if you don't use Earth Legacy. So I highly recommend putting that on there just for the additional distance. You can test both immediately. It's going to feel way more comfortable and way more able to cover areas with Earth Legacy. Last but not least, because we use Leap on here, Gravity Leap, we want Despair on here because we want to have this ability to essentially debuff enemies that we hit with the Gravity Leap and make them take 2 times more anomaly damage for 5 seconds. Now, as mentioned, let's quickly talk about the skills and the rotations. So obviously we are using Earthquake, we're using Endless Mass, and we're using Gravity Leap. Now, generally speaking, you have extremely low cooldowns on your abilities, but you also have extremely low uptime on some of these buffs. Let me give you an example. Despair, for instance, is only up for 5 seconds. So you really have to capitalize on, once you land with the leap, that you get your earthquakes out as fast as possible so that you can definitely benefit from that additional double damage that you get there. So for example, you need to keep this in mind when you are working around your rotation. So typically what I would do is I would go something like Endless Mass, pulls all the enemies together. Then I leap onto them, or while they're being pulling together, I might actually pull off a shot and just proc some of the effects on my shotgun. Then I'll leap, and as soon as I land, I make sure that I'm facing the direction that I'm hitting most of the enemies, and I just hit out my 3 quakes. Then in that time, while your skills are resetting, anything that's left alive, you can melee or AoE melee, which is going to get you some additional resistance piercing, as we'll see with the class tree. And then essentially you can just sort of repeat the whole rotation. That would be the way, at least that's the way how I play it. That's the way how I dump damage onto bosses or, you know, groups of enemies. Generally with groups of enemies, you don't have to get too spicy. You don't have to worry about always getting the Endless Mass and the Gravity Leap out, because even unpowered Earthquake, so that isn't affected by Endless Mass or Gravity Leap's debuff, will still hit for, you know, quite a bit. Of course, we're going to go bottom tree because we want to pick up as much anomaly power as we can. But at the same time, we also want to be picking up cooldown nodes for all of our skills when we can, as well as some, you know, essentially making our way through the tree so we get to the final capstone, which is Earth's Heritage, which gives us that nice big 50% boost to seismic skills, or more specifically to Quake. So we're just going to move through the tree. We're going to pick up anomaly, we're going to pick up cooldown, all of that. We do want to be picking up strong arm of the anomaly because this is a fantastic addition to your melee and your AoE melee slam. So you can work that into your rotation, and it's a great way for you to spike up your resistance piercing and essentially then also increase your anomaly for some follow up with, you know, hitting with much harder hitting quakes or something like that. Now we also are picking up any kind of resistance piercing nodes along the way, and just more cooldown, everything like that. We pick up the bleed duration and increased bleed damage nodes because a lot of our damage actually comes from bleed, and oftentimes you'll see that just one earthquake can almost kill enemies, and then the bleed will just take care of them and you can just continue on running down the arena. We do want to get execution as well, which just helps us chip away at that last 30% of health when it comes to bosses and, you know, elites and captains and so on. And again, like I said, we're just picking up anomaly power as we go along. We pick up blood bath, as I said, anything that increases the duration of our bleed or the power of the ticks, basically. We then get skilled sentry, which increases our armor by 20% and resistance by 20% per 10 seconds when your skills end. This bonus does not stack, so it's not like if you do it 3 times you get 60-60, but the point is you can always have this up because your cooldowns are far less than 10 seconds, and so therefore you can always be sure that you have this up. Then we do pick up both of these, which is more resistance piercing and a little bit more damage from our bleeds. And then lastly, as mentioned, Earth's Heritage gets us that. Now, if we just quickly jump back here, and if I just quickly go out to make sure that it's updated, we'll see that we have extremely low cooldowns. We have 3 earthquakes available every 6 seconds. We have an Endless Mass basically every 11 seconds, and we have a leap every 11 seconds. So you can almost do 2 rotations of earthquake in the time that it takes this to reset. So just overall, this is a fantastic way. Now, when we get to the PAX tree itself, of course, what we're going to want to do is we want to go bottom PAX tree. We do want to be picking up impact point, which just flat out makes our seismic and kinetic skill damage increase by 30% of your anomaly power. This bonus damage is split among all damaged enemies. So it means when you quake and you hit like 8 enemies, this is actually shared across all of those enemies. We do get puncture here. So back in the day, in the vanilla game, if you wanted to have your earthquakes apply bleed, there was a mod that you had to install for this. Now with puncture, we don't have to do that anymore, and that saves us 1 mod slot. So this says that all your seismic skills inflict bleed, and anomaly damage to enemies afflicted by bleed is another 10% increase. Then we also get Earth and Shell. Now this is where all of your toughness comes from in this build, and basically I would say you're nigh unkillable with this build as long as you keep pushing out damage. All of your abilities are designed to hit multiple enemies at once, so as long as you're constantly making sure that you're hitting 2, 3, even if it's just 1 enemy you're hitting with all of your earthquakes, you're going to have so much shield that you're going to have no problem with soaking up damage. That is why we can comfortably play this, whereas Devastators are already strong by default. You really don't have to worry about stacking any defensive mods here because Earth and Shell takes care of you. Now, Upheaval and Multi-Strike is what we want to get as our final 2. Upheaval basically saying that enemies damaged by seismic skills, i.e. earthquakes, become upheaved for 2 seconds, storing 10% of damage received during that time and releasing it once the effect ends. Now, this is why you will often see when you hit stuff with a bunch of earthquakes, the damage will kind of like sort of chug along, and then suddenly as soon as this wears off, as this upheaved ends, then you'll just see like a big chunk of damage essentially hitting there. Now, Multi-Strike accentuates this effect even further by saying that 30% of damage dealt by seismic skills is stored and added to your next seismic skill. The effect resets every time you release your stored energy. So this just again enhances that the first one you hit, 30% of its damage is stored onto the next one, and then that hits, and then you essentially just repeat this process the whole time. And that's another reason why we want more than one earthquake, so that we can capitalize from this effect. Now with the Ascension itself, this is a very baby character, so I have I have very few points. Actually, I have to spend a lot more time playing this. But of course, as always, whenever we deal with anomaly based characters, and for that matter even in most cases with firepower, you want to be dumping 10 points into anomaly damage, because that's just the flat damage increase across the top. I do pick up additional anomaly power here, and then I start digging into some resistance piercing. Of course, status is good here as well, because that actually increases the strength of the bleed ticks on enemies, like how hard it ticks for, how much damage. So that's also good as well. And if for some reason, I don't know how the hell that would be possible, if you struggle with survivability, then skills leads can also be good here. But definitely I would say your priority is anomaly damage, probably anomaly power. After that, get some resistance piercing, get some armor piercing, get yourself some more status, and then start going further on even into cooldown reduction and that sort of thing. And that's it for the video and the build. BLEED QUAKE is as strong as it ever was. There was nothing ever wrong with this build to begin with. It was really consistent and just a good old-fashioned well-rounded build in vanilla Outriders, and with the addition of Worldslayer, with the PAX points that kind of like make your seismic skills even better, and with the addition of the increased mods that we can add that allow us to just stack more damage multipliers onto it, this is as strong as it ever was, and actually, you know, actually stronger. The point is that, and I sort of said this at the beginning of the video, but if you were bored with playing BLEED QUAKE on the Devastator and you were looking for something a little bit different, then unfortunately I have bad news for you, because this plays exactly the same and it's the build that you know. But if it's something that you knew and loved on Devastator, it is in its best state yet, and you can have a whole bunch of fun with it, because I sure as hell did. Let me know in the comments down below what you would change, what you would add to this, which other builds for the Devastator you would like me to take a stab at and build and start gathering, you know, gear for and have a look at. I definitely do wanna, and I know I'm gonna catch a lot of flack for this, I do wanna build an Impale Devastator, especially with all of the new Impale mods. I think it's kind of cool. I've had a bunch of guys who ran expeditions with me who were using it, and it just looked like a lot of fun. Whether it's like super powerful, that will be, you know, will be seen once we test it, but it definitely did look fun. And sometimes fun is almost as as important as powerful. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.